Hey everyone, Drew Murray from D20 Advice, and this is my 30-day world. Um, Absolute tabletop, done this amazing thing. Again, we're live, and sorry, I'm doing this on the sofa. I've just finished a game of Call of Cthulhu, which was really good fun. But instead of going to bed, I'm doing this. So, today's question asks, what iconic monsters exist in your world? In the world of the Taihun? Well, Dungeons and Dragons has been a weird thing for me with monsters. I remember second edition where you could get the Monstrous Compendium and it was like files and you could rearrange them and stuff. I had a lot of fun with that. But there were always staples that I went with. Troglodytes. Love troglodytes. Dragons, always. Beholders, I've loved the idea of, but I've only run a few games with beholders in. As like an ever-present, sorry, as a direct antagonist. I've had them as ever-present things before, but never as like this is the antagonist that you're fighting against here. So to that end, Taihun, what iconic monsters are here? What are the iconic monsters of the world? So I see this question as something that can be read in two ways. It could either be what iconic Dungeons and Dragons monsters are you using in your world, or what monsters in your world are iconic to your world? Now, there is a difference there because it could be that you make great use of aboleths and they are iconic in your world and they're iconic D&D monsters, but you might also have a bunch of other iconic D&D monsters just running about the world that are not necessarily iconic in your world, or at least in the context of your world. They're not necessarily common or a huge threat. They wouldn't achieve that iconic status. You may also be using entirely made up creatures that only exist in your world and not in anyone else's yet, and so they are iconic to your world and don't exist elsewhere in Dungeons and Dragons lore. I combine both of those two things. So I use dragons, I use beholders, I use giants, orcs, elves, dwarves, gnomes, halflings, goblins, hobgoblins, that sort of thing, and kobolds. A lot of those are used. In fact, I use all of the horse, so to speak. I don't say no to any monster manual monsters appearing. The lore behind them differs greatly. Blights are not just plant creatures from where a vampire was killed or something. It's just any negatively affected area. Oh, I have a blemish on my arm. I'll just notice that in the camera. Hurts a little. Yeah, so the lore behind these things can change. They can be different from the way they are in the Monster Manual. But for the Taihun, iconic monsters, I would say, are the Fae. This is something I'm working with for nerdarchy.com. There's a few Fae creatures that I'm writing up for them for use in one of their future products if they want to use it. And the Fae creatures are, I would say, iconic to the Taihun because the Fae are this strange, elusive strain of encounters and NPCs that happen in a weird, almost Lovecraftian sense, sort of tangential to the rest of the play experience. So yes, there are archfey, but the way a lot of the the storytelling goes in most of the times that I've run Taihun, and any time that I'll be running Taihun in the near future, the Fae are this not very well understood thing. It's like the Upside Down in Stranger Things. You've got the Dark Fae and the Light Fae. The Dark Fae are very much dealing with like upside down territory. The portals are icky and disgusting. The Fae themselves are these spindly, wicked looking creatures from the abyss. They have a realm of existence that is exhausting to be in the game mechanical and just purely narrative sense. There's just like a pollen hanging in the air. It feels like soup that you're moving through. It's a really unpleasant place to be in the dark Fey realm. Um, and then you've got the light Fey realms, which are similar but warmer instead of cooler. Instead of a thick soup of the air, it's just sort of like a heavy air, like it's over oxygenated, which it is. So it also produces a euphoria when you're breathing it. The creatures there are bigger, bulkier, stronger, but also due to just various magics and things, faster and smarter and better at hiding. So the Fey creatures, the Archfey, I am not statting up. They are essentially gods, or god level. I've not statted up the Fey, the Archfey, sorry. But different types of Fey creature that I don't find in monster manuals, I've started creating those. There's a Dark Fey in particular, which I love, and she just comes out whenever you need that really scary thing to happen, and it's not a directly related thing. My favorite implementation of it was in a play by post rather than in the live play thing, because the live play thing, they very quickly dispatched of her, and it was the tone wasn't quite set. It was a rather gun ho. Or is it gung ho? Might be gung ho rather than gun ho. Anyway, rather aggressive play group who were very drunk at the time. So I don't blame them for just like dispatching summarily the way that they did. Anyway, the best implementation of this was play by post. They were heading down into a half sunken citadel. So it's this ancient ruin that's sunk into a hill. So it's mostly buried. The fact that it's been covered in like grass and moss for centuries means that people just kind of ignored it. It's out of the way. Someone found it. They eventually like break their way in and find that some parts of it are flooded. They managed to get through that, and the moment they get to the other side, so the flood trap thing was this corridor that initially would have big metal doors on either side, and they would come down and act as a separator, so that if anyone entered the castle, they would go through the entrance hall, and then if they were basically being invaded or something, they could trap them in this corridor. Or if they weren't too sure of them, they could lock down this corridor and keep them in the entrance hall. It was a way to separate sections off. So this corridor, they accidentally set off the trap to lower the doors. The weight of the heavy doors shook the foundations. The ceiling was already cracked. It cracked open the ceiling, and the flooded basin of just natural rainwater gathering over centuries in this sort of underground cavern thing that had formed around it. That breaks through and starts to flood the corridor. They eventually manage to lift the door while mostly submerged and fighting skeletons that have kind of been stirred up from the silt at the bottom of this corridor. So 4 of these skeletons manage to lift the door, get everyone underneath, and let it down. And so they're now in a semi-flooded next part of the area. And in the semi-flooded bit, they're struggling to keep their torches lit. They're feeling the cold. They're wet through and through. and they start seeing in one of the next rooms over these long, spindly bits of fungus or tendrils sort of hanging down from the ceiling. Whenever they touch one, it would sloop up into this weird fungal pocket on the ceiling. And they managed to work their way through, occasionally getting grabbed by these tendrils. But as they started making their way through this room, trying to cut the tendrils and stuff, you had a couple of creatures dash out of this portal. And these creatures were meanlocks, which are tortured elves driven mad by the Fae. So they fight these meanlocks and manage to wipe them out. And as they take them out and see some more meanlocks coming through the portal, they see down at the bottom of this sloped corridor ahead of them this lady, this dark Fae that they like dipped into the portal to see what was going on, while the rest of them were fighting it off, and that's how they worked out how the portal worked. And they saw this Fae working on torturing an elf that they'd seen get kidnapped earlier, and like turning this elf into a meanlock. So they got her attention, peeved her off, nipped back through the portal, looking down this corridor. They now see that she's here, and she's doing all these like sort of Japanese horror sort of neck cracks and rapid limb movements, and scurrying towards them, stopping, standing up. She's like 8 feet tall, so she spreads herself out with these legs and hands touching the ceiling, just like she looks huge. And I've taken a lot of inspiration from like Coraline, the mum from that. That kind of look to her. Very, very creepy, very long and pointy features, and it really shook some people up. I was very pleased with the result. The drunken one, not so much. Similar description was given. One of them did decide that they were too scared and would not act. That was fine. He's a bit of a lightweight drunk, so he was feeling emotions a lot at that point. But yeah, the rest of them were just like, no, you know what? Screw this. We're gonna kill her, and just went whole hog. And regardless of what I threw at them, disadvantage for this and that. Excuse me. Like I said, it's a late night. I've just finished a game. So I apologize for yawning. But yes, they weren't having anything. They just sliced off her head. But yeah, so I would say that they are fairly iconic because the point of that citadel was to go underground and find this magical crystal and face off against these elven groups that were trying to claim it. And the whole point of that mission would then be you are now introduced to the wider politics of the region. This is the fallout. How do you want to deal with that? So the Fae being there was tangential. It made sense for the lot of the lore that had been laid down, but it wasn't like a direct, like the Fae weren't orchestrating things; they were just there, and that's what I feel makes them fairly iconic in this. Is that they will pop up. They will pop up wherever is feasible for them to pop up. They are extra dimensional beings as far as people are concerned. They exist elsewhere on the planet, but they just seem to pop in and pop out and just do something, and people aren't quite sure what is going on. Why are they doing this thing? Their motives are entirely unclear. I haven't determined a motive. I want them to remain this strange alien thing that happens to the world. And I love that idea. The dragons, I've mapped out like how they're going to go about things. I haven't mapped out like all the machinations because they are immortal beings able to pull strings. We can't hope to imagine what that must be like. Oh, excuse me. I'm gonna go because way too tired, and I should have waited until the morning to do this, but I just really wanted to get this out. So I'll see everyone at a later point. I guess I apologize for the yawning, but yeah, the Fae, especially the Dark Fae, I would say are iconic to the Taihun campaign. They are mostly homebrew, um, but yeah, they evoke the creepiness, the otherworldliness, the alien nature of Fae creatures. That they are not just like sentient wolves and bears and spirit animals and things. That these are creatures that our initial like fairy tales and stories were made from in European culture. Um, they or when you start dealing with, especially when you go to like a Greek and heading into sort of like the Middle East sort of cultures, when you're dealing with spirits, demons, the DAE kind. Yeah, this will be the inspiration for the Fae in the world of the Tehun. Just strange beings whose motives you don't understand at all, whose abilities can seem strange, and there is this abduction element to a lot of what they do for means unknown. And I love the sort of Lovecraftian side of it. And I'll just finish playing Call of Cthulhu. At least that's what I'm getting from them. So yes, thank you very much for sticking with me so far, and I'll see you all later. Bye.